Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some absolutely incredible, highly practical strategies from Dr. Alice Boyce's groundbreaking work, The Anxiety Toolkit. Look, if you've ever felt like your own brain is just completely getting in your way, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to explore how to build a totally personalized manual for operating your mind, effectively navigating those awful mental stuck points, and really reclaiming your energy. Okay, let's dive into this. We so often operate under this completely false assumption that to be happy or successful, we need to achieve this state of zero anxiety. But Dr. Boyce just shatters that common belief right out of the gate. Reducing your anxiety to zero, it isn't just impossible, it actually isn't even useful. By validating that anxiety is just a totally normal human experience, we can finally drop that heavy layer of guilt we carry around. What I found absolutely fascinating in her work is this central thesis. Anxiety itself really isn't your enemy. The actual problem, the thing we're going to fix today, is when that anxiety gets so overwhelming and paralyzing that you just become stuck, literally unable to take action in your own life. So, how do we get unstuck? It's the million-dollar question, right? How do we actually shift away from the pain of that paralyzing, restrictive anxiety and move toward the promise of living a full, vibrant life? Well, to do that, we really need to understand how our brain's machinery actually works. And then we need to arm ourselves with a practical, everyday manual for operating it.
First up, we've got to reframe how we even view anxiety. Believe it or not, it turns out anxiety is actually an evolutionary advantage. It's a natural survival mechanism designed to trigger hypervigilance, basically forcing us to pause and scan our environment for danger. But here's the catch. Our systems are hardwired to err heavily on the side of caution. Honestly, your brain would rather experience 100 false alarms, freaking out over threats that don't even exist, than miss one single real danger. So, when you feel that massive sudden spike of worry over, say, a vague email from your boss or some awkward social interaction, your system is literally just prioritizing survival over accuracy. Recognizing this, it can massively reduce the frustration you feel toward your own anxious tendencies.
Now, to manage these false alarms, we need a reliable system. And the toolkit we're exploring today is heavily rooted in CBT, or Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It's so fascinating because CBT is this incredibly effective, heavily research-backed treatment that really zeroes in on how our thoughts and behaviors are just intimately interconnected. We're drawing on literally decades of hard science here. The whole idea is realizing that making tiny shifts in how we think will directly impact how we act, and vice versa. This gives us a rock-solid foundation for the really practical tools we're about to jump into. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where we tend to get stuck, the 5 common anxiety traps. We've got hesitancy, rumination, perfectionism, fear of feedback, and avoidance. Now, what's absolutely crucial to realize here is how these traps completely reinforce each other. It's like a giant puzzle. For example, take perfectionism, that burning need to have everything flawlessly executed. Well, that leads straight into hesitancy and overthinking. When you delay taking action because it isn't perfect yet, you start to dread the feedback you might get, which ultimately results in total avoidance. By just getting familiar with these concepts, you can start to develop real self-awareness and spot your own specific patterns. And honestly, that is the very first step to breaking the cycle. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how specific cognitive distortions actually fuel those exact traps. And let's be real, we all do these. You assume a tiny mistake at work means you're definitely getting fired. That's catastrophizing. Or you assume your friend is furious with you just because they sent a really short text. That's mind reading. Or maybe you fall hard into all or nothing thinking, seeing everything strictly in black and white. So how do we get unstuck from this? We have to act like a detective. When you notice these patterns creeping in, you have to actively hunt for evidence that totally contradicts your negative assumptions. You got to challenge the thought. Ask yourself, is this truly black and white, or is there a whole lot of gray area I'm missing? While we're challenging those thoughts, we also have to tackle the behavior, specifically avoidance. Avoidance is tricky because it gives you this awesome short-term relief, but let me tell you, it will eat you alive psychologically in the long run because it just reinforces the fear. The golden strategy here is something called a gradual exposure hierarchy. Look, if your absolute biggest fear is public speaking, you don't just jump straight onto a massive stage. No way. You break it down. Step 1, maybe just start speaking up a little more in low-stakes, small group chats. Step 2, initiate super brief, casual conversations with acquaintances. Step 3, eventually, you tackle the big public speaking event. Breaking a massive fear into small, systematic, totally manageable steps builds your confidence over time, and it literally proves to your brain that you can handle challenging situations. Okay, let's talk about the perfectionism trap.
Anxious folks often get completely locked into a performance focus. This is all about constantly proving your worth and being terrified of failure. And here's a totally surprising and kind of tragic fact I learned from the source material. When clinical perfectionists actually manage to hit their ultra high goals, they often just conclude that their standards must not have been high enough in the first place. I mean, wow. So they just revise them upward, meaning they literally never ever find a sense of peace. The healthier, way more sustainable strategy is shifting to a mastery focus. This is where you adopt a growth mindset. You prioritize learning from setbacks, and you celebrate progress over perfection. Mistakes just become an essential, expected part of the learning process instead of some devastating blow to your self-worth. Let's move to and see how this builds right into our next trap, the fear of feedback. Anxious people will avoid feedback like the plague because it feels deeply threatening. But there are some incredibly practical ways to cope because, let's face it, feedback is how we actually get better. One of my absolute favorite tricks is using canned responses. Having a totally pre-planned phrase ready to go, like, hey, thank you so much for sharing that. Let me take a little time to process it. That buys you crucial time to manage your initial defensiveness. Combine that simple phrase with some deep breathing, and you can effectively separate the actual actionable content of the critique from your immediate emotional and physical reaction. You start reframing criticism as a really handy tool for growth, rather than feeling like you're under personal attack. Now, to actually implement all these strategies, you need energy. And Dr. Boyes uses this amazing metaphor of the mental fuel tank. You see, anxious perfectionists will often run their mental fuel tanks all the way down to completely empty, rather than keeping a little gas in reserve. You have to understand that willpower is a finite resource. It literally can and will be depleted. If you're out there trying to control every single tiny aspect of your life or trying to maintain perfection in absolutely all areas, you are going to drain the tank, and that leads straight to burnout and massively heightened anxiety. We have to be willing to ruthlessly prioritize our focus, cut out unnecessary decision-making, and really conserve our willpower for stuff that actually matters. And hey, when things don't go perfectly, which they won't, how do you treat yourself? If there's any anxiety habit that is just incredibly hard to break, it is self-criticism. But it absolutely must be broken. Harsh self-judgment does nothing but undermine your confidence and fuel more avoidance. The antidote? Surprisingly enough, it's cultivating self-compassion. This means practicing mindfulness, recognizing our common humanity, like, hey, everyone struggles sometimes, and practicing genuine self-kindness. Treating yourself with the exact same gentleness and understanding you'd offer to a good friend. It doesn't mean you're excusing mistakes. Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. Research shows it actually increases your motivation and creates the mental and emotional space you need for clear thinking and effective problem solving. So the crucial point is really how we define our worth overall. Dr. Boyes uses a fantastic analogy here for diversifying your self-esteem. Just like you'd never put all your money into a single stock because it's way too financially risky, you definitely shouldn't put all your psychological eggs in one basket. Think about it. If your entire self-worth is tied up in work success, a single bad day at the office is going to absolutely devastate you. We need to actively broaden our self-concept. Start drawing your self-esteem from your relationships, your personal hobbies, your community contributions, and just your inherent personal qualities, like your kindness or your creativity. This kind of diversification creates a much more stable sense of self and builds massive resilience. All right, once you've started applying all these tools, you're challenging those distortions, using gradual exposure, practicing self-compassion, and diversifying your self-esteem, you enter what we call the maintenance phase. This involves setting up regular weekly check-ins, doing some brief daily mindfulness, getting regular physical activity, and really nurturing your supportive relationships. And as you integrate these practices, something pretty amazing happens. Your anxiety gradually shifts from being this huge, central, paralyzing focus of your life to just a manageable background concern. Now, progress isn't perfectly linear, right? You're definitely going to have ups and downs. But with this toolkit, you are totally equipped to handle them. You are finally free to pursue what the author calls highly idiosyncratic goals. Basically, the things that matter deeply and uniquely to you. Which brings us to a final and incredibly exciting thought. Overcoming anxiety isn't just about moving away from fear, it's really about moving towards something meaningful. You are complex, you are multifaceted, and you are so much more than your anxiety. So I really want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. What will you build with a multidimensional you when anxiety is no longer holding you back? It's time to embrace your whole self, put your new toolkit to work, and go live a deeply fulfilling life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.